Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you might be viewing from. Welcome back to the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean, or RP21. The apt theme is Building Resilient Economies in the Americas and the Caribbean. Earlier this morning, we saw the opening ceremony. It took place earlier. And now we make room for our sessions and our robust discussions. Now, kindly allow me to acknowledge the government of Jamaica, specifically the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or CDEMA, and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR. We also acknowledge and recognize that there are multi-stakeholders, other sectors, organizations, and agencies that are a part of this very important ecosystem. Now, I am Dr. Terry Carrell-Reed, and I have the pleasure of serving you in the capacity of host over the next couple of days. We're coming to you live from the Jamaica Conference Center, but we are fully aware that this is a global community. Therefore, whether you are watching via the Hopin platform or perhaps you are watching via YouTube, Twitter, or perhaps Facebook on our broadcasting partners page, please let us know where you are viewing from, your country, your nationality, your flag, your time zone. We would like to know. Now, inclusion is a must for us here. Therefore, a los hispanohablantes, bienvenidos. Es un placer tenerle a ustedes con nosotros. Y yo estoy segura que este evento será muy informativo. We're very happy to also let you know that we have Spanish translators that are here at your service. Now, for our French speakers, I am certainly not fluent. Je parle français un petit peu. Bienvenue, c'est un plaisir. And thankfully, we also have French translators for you as well. Now, our hearing impaired as well as deaf communities cannot be left behind. And therefore, we're so happy and we acknowledge our international sign language interpreters. Now, please go ahead and use the hashtags RP21, hashtag Sendai Americas, hashtag ResilientJA, hashtag Resilient Caribbean, just to get your other parts of your network involved. We're extremely happy to have you, and we cannot wait to hear the kinds of conversations we are going to have. So now our carefully curated sessions begin. From the topic to the organizers, to the moderators and the speakers, we have had a great time putting these persons together. So we start with the very first high-level session, and the topic and the title is Americas and Caribbean, the Resilience Building Challenge for the Next Decades. The organizers are the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, and the Coordination Center for the Prevention of Natural Disasters in Central America. It is my pleasure to welcome the moderator, Elizabeth Riley, Executive Secretary of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. She will go ahead and introduce the speakers. Do enjoy.
Honorable Ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the high-level session 1 of the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean, RP21, as we examine the topic, the Resilience Building Challenge for the Next Decades. My name is Liz Riley. I am the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and I will be your moderator for this session. The COVID-19 pandemic, a global disaster of epic proportions, has transformed our world, affecting millions of people. It has exposed existing vulnerability, exacerbated social inequities, and derailed development trajectories. The social impact has been high, particularly for women, children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. COVID-19 has certainly made our resilience journey more complex. Superimposed against the backdrop of climate change and the associated increases in damage and losses, as well as the plethora of other hazards affecting us here in the Americas and the Caribbean. Certainly, the experiences in Caribbean SIDS over 2020 to 2021 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Haiti, Guyana, and Suriname have demonstrated this complexity. It has also reiterated the systemic nature of risk and impacted the pace of attainment of the Sendai framework targets, and by extension, the comprehensive disaster management strategy targets in our Caribbean space. Today's session, taking place just 1 year before the intergovernmental midterm review of the Sendai framework, which is scheduled for 2023, presents a unique and timely opportunity to reflect on and take stock of the most salient challenges from the perspective of different stakeholders in the region for accelerating the implementation of the Sendai framework for resilience building, including in specific country contexts. So what are we aiming to achieve from today's session? Well, there are three things. We want to identify difficulties or constraints faced by various countries and stakeholders based on past experience to prioritize actions to improve resilience. We want to provide key elements for consideration on how to improve disaster risk governance and risk management systems. And third, we want to highlight how international solidarity and cooperation can help solve these issues locally and nationally and recommit to accelerating progress towards disaster risk reduction and the Sustainable Development Goals. So today's session will commence with 5-minute opening statements by each of our esteemed panelists. Subsequently, specific questions will be directed to each of our panelists, and they will be given the opportunity to respond. And finally, we move to a discussion session with 2 lead interventions before we wrap the session up and conclude on the key messages which are emerging. So let me start by taking you to our panel. We have the benefit of contributions from a very distinguished 5-member panel, hailing from Costa Rica, from Brazil, from UN Women, the US Geological Survey, as well as UN ECLAC. And we're going to invite each member of the panel to share perspectives on this general question. With the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on different groups, and considering the current impacts observed in the Americas and the Caribbean due to the climate crisis, and from the perspective of the organization you represent, what are the main challenges in order to build resilience in the Americas and the Caribbean in the next decade? And we'll go first to Her Excellency Epsie Campbell Barr. Her Excellency is the Vice President and Foreign Minister of Costa Rica and is the first Afro-descendant woman to hold this high position in the American continent. Formerly holding the positions of Deputy and Minister of Foreign Relations and Worship, she is a researcher and human rights activist on issues related to women, Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, human development, social inclusion, and the environment. Her Excellency graduated as an economist and has master's degrees in international cooperation for development and in advanced techniques of management and political decision. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muy buenos días o buenas tardes, depende de dónde se encuentren. Quisiera saludar a todos las participantes y panelistas que comparten conmigo este espacio y felicitar a la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas para la reducción del riesgo de desastres por la organización de este importante evento, así como a las agencias que auspiciaron tan importante actividad. Quiero felicitar además a la Coordinación del Caribe por tener la posibilidad de hacer un intercambio regional sobre estas experiencias. El primer desafío que tenemos que colocar en la mesa a nivel de políticas públicas es la forma en que existen efectos diferenciados del cambio climático en los diferentes grupos poblacionales. Particularmente quisiera resaltar el impacto del cambio climático en las mujeres, las comunidades rurales, las comunidades afrodescendientes e indígenas y aquellas comunidades más pobres que habitan los países insulares y caribeños, así como las zonas de más alta vulnerabilidad a los desastres naturales. Y es importante hacer esta diferenciación para que pongamos la mirada en el financiamiento del cambio climático, en la resiliencia y la adaptación y mitigación de estas comunidades. O sea, el primer gran desafío es colocar el financiamiento en la resiliencia, adaptación y mitigación en las comunidades más vulnerabilizadas. Los recientes huracanes en Centroamérica y el Caribe así lo demuestran, y por eso debemos de tomar decisiones urgentes a nivel regional y nacional, priorizando en quiénes son las personas más vulnerables. También es importante que pongamos a las comunidades como protagonistas en todas las fases de las emergencias, y no solamente como damnificadas, sino una participación activa que genere liderazgo y que genere una capacidad de adaptación y de resiliencia. Partiendo de la experiencia de Costa Rica, nuestros avances en materia de gestión de riesgo y adaptación de cambio climático nos ha obligado a replantear las metas y a poner a las comunidades como protagonistas en todas las fases. Y principalmente pensando en la pandemia del COVID, todo lo que implica un carácter económico y ambiental de la recuperación. En el contexto de la pandemia y la pospandemia, se debe de planificar la recuperación económica, entendiendo la atención que la emergencia demanda de manera inmediata, pero tomando como perspectiva la recuperación vista desde la perspectiva de gestión del riesgo a los desastres como un tema de largo plazo que requiere un abordaje estratégico. En este contexto puedo enumerar algunos de los desafíos tales como el desarrollo de los sistemas nacionales de gestión de riesgo. La gestión de riesgo y la adaptación al cambio climático vista desde la perspectiva de descarbonización demandan de nuevo, y quisiera poner ahí, no solamente la participación de actores sociales, sino también toda la convocatoria que se debe de hacer el Estado desde una perspectiva de política pública. La evaluación y mejora de la calidad de mecanismos de articulación de los actores sociales y la necesidad del uso de indicadores con los cuales se puede medir el desempeño y la eficiencia de la organización y la participación. Quiero terminar planteando que los desafíos principales que estamos mirando es promover una participación activa e integrada del sector privado, promover una mayor participación de las comunidades y la sociedad civil organizada, propiciar la desconcentración, procurando que las capacidades locales, mejores capacidades locales para la respuesta ante los desastres y la autonomía en la toma de decisiones, así como el acceso a recursos, promover en la inclusión del tema del riesgo, desastres y adaptación en los procesos de planificación sectorial e interinstitucional, garantizar el protagonismo de las mujeres en todas las fases de decisión. Son ellas las que tienen una perspectiva mucho mayor de los impactos del desastre, mejorar la coordinación y la conducción de los operativos de emergencia con una coordinación de gobiernos locales, gobierno nacional, empresas privadas y comunidades, fortalecer la participación, la planificación de los procesos de recuperación bajo los principios de reconstruir mejor y no reducir y no reproducir la vulnerabilidad. Finalmente, generar los recursos, distribuir los recursos de manera equitativa y estratégica que permitan atender los momentos inmediatos de la emergencia y todo el proceso. Quisiera poner sobre la mesa la necesidad de establecer mecanismos que garanticen acceso a la información a todos los y las habitantes, pero fundamentalmente la necesidad de priorizar lo que se denomina como protección financiera y que es el tema más relevante, urgente y prioritario de la planificación de riesgo, y su atención debería de estar orientada a la adopción de una estrategia financiera de riesgos, la estimación del potencial de pérdidas que pueden ocurrir y en la generación de diversos instrumentos de protección y disponibilidad de recursos. Entre diversos aspectos que se deben de considerar está la determinación del valor de los activos públicos y la estimación del pasivo contingente, de forma que puedan ser incorporados también en las estimaciones fiscales. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I think this sets the panel discussion on a very exciting start. You have covered a range of topics in your 5-minute intervention, from the global challenge of climate change, the role of communities, the specific issues around recovery, and particularly recovery from the pandemic. So let us move then from that macro perspective given by Her Excellency and zero in on a more local context. And it's my pleasure to welcome our next panelist, Senor Dario Jorge Giolo Sadi, who was elected mayor of Campinas, Brazil in 2021. He is a physician who specializes in neurology, and his public career began in the 1990s. He was elected city councilor for 5 consecutive terms and is the author of relevant bills focused on the area of health and the environment. His tenure as president of the Metropolitan Chamber and Parliament of Campinas in 2005 to 2006 brought greater integration between the municipalities and more investments by the state and federal governments for the region, mainly in the areas of safety, environment, and health. Senor Sadi, you have the floor.
Good morning or good afternoon. First, I would like to thank by the invitation to participate in this event. Campinas is a Brazilian city in the state of São Paulo with 1,150,000 people. We are the center of the metropolitan region with more than 3 million people. We develop actions to improve the capacity of response to disaster situations, and we invest a lot in support to the productive sector, in social protection, in training to reduce the impact of disasters and emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic in the municipal economy. In Campinas, we work together with the government of the state of São Paulo and based on national and international guidelines to face the disease. We had the effort and entire arm of health professionals beyond the union of all public sectors in one committee to face the pandemic. The committee gave the coordinates for action many times hard for our health system to remain resilient even in the middle of the most critical periods of pandemic. We had over 200 patients with disease waiting for an intensive care bed and nursery wards. And even so, the system did not collapse. Campinas is the first city in the state of São Paulo to monitoring fauna through a technology innovated and the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, the platform of Wide Health Information System. We even conducted a great public health simulate with 90 professionals using the system. We simulate everything that must be unleashed in a yellow fever emergency. Since the meeting of the wild animals dead to the suspected infections until the planning actions to prevent the disease from affecting population. We have recurring plans for preventing disasters in our fields. At this time, we prepare for the summer operations in order to minimize consequences of heavy and temporal rain. Our prevent works includes major actions with million reais investment for the construction of dams to avoid flooding in neighborhoods on the edge of streams and the rivers of the city. In addition, features such as installation of flood alert sensors, training of community agents to measure levels of rain, and removal of families from risk areas. We cannot forget the role of our teams in drought periods. We registered only between May and September of this year 471 outbreaks of fire in Campinas, an increase of 76% compared to 2020. With the partnership of the Band of the Firefighters, we include a voluntary brigade with community members prepared to assist face burns in rural and forest areas. Also, I call your attention to the local law established to prohibit fire, to prepare land or clean it, in addition to safety work that defines the practice of releasing balloons. We are certified since 2013 by the United Nations as the first Brazilian city model of a good habits in building resilience to reduce risks and disasters. In the same way, we were pioneers in developing the EU Resilient Communities Project in one local risk area subject to flooding. The municipal government was still concurred in 2019. The United Nations Sasakawa Awards for Disaster Reduction through our civil defense. The choice was made by the unique approach of sustainable community and commitment to include our vulnerable groups in mapping to mitigate risks. To finish, I remember our resistance plan for Campinas is context update. The plan gathers the municipal government's best efforts to provide life dignified for the population. It is a document that guides our actions, and that I personally make sure that it is complied. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadi. And of course, we do have an opportunity to hear a lot more about the initiatives in your municipality when we come back to the intervention a little bit later. But I want to thank you very much for sharing on your perspectives on the role of governance that came through very clearly in the resilience building efforts going forward, and also use of technology, including for support of early warning systems. So thank you very much for that contribution. We look forward to hearing from you again shortly. So earlier in my opening remarks, and also in the contribution from Her Excellency a bit earlier, we talked about the differential impact of the pandemic on different groups. And certainly women was one of those groups that was identified. So it is appropriate that our next speaker, Ms. Maria Noel Piazza, is joining us today. She is the Regional Director of UN Women for Latin America and the Caribbean. She is an architect by profession, with postgraduate studies in urban planning from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and the University of Chile. And she has over 40 years of professional experience. She has been a consultant for the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Environment Program and coordinator of the Regional Training Program to improve urban and environmental management in Latin America and the Caribbean at UN ECLAC. Ms. Maria Noel Piazza, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We are hearing you well. Please continue.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm afraid the CV that you mentioned is not mine because I'm not from Mexico. I'm from Uruguay, and I have 30 years in the UN system, but not in human development. But it doesn't matter. What I am right now is working as Regional Director of UN Women for the Americas and the Caribbean. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation that the Regional Director, Raúl Salazar, did to me. And for you, Madame Liz, really, thank you very much for moderating. Es un placer compartir este panel con la señora vicepresidenta de Costa Rica, la doctora Epsi Campbell, también con, no sé si va a estar la señora Lisa Bárcena, pero los colegas de la CEPAL, y para mí también es un gran honor de compartir con el alcalde de Campinas que nos acaba de hablar y por supuesto las autoridades del CARICOM. Quisiera decirles que para nosotros desde ONU Mujeres participar en esta sesión de alto nivel América y el Caribe sobre el reto de la construcción de resiliencia es fundamental porque siempre las mujeres quedan detrás. Por eso es importante hablar del tema de género y felicito al gobierno de Jamaica por esta gran oportunidad que nos dan acogiendo este gran evento en el Caribe, que es la zona de nuestra región que es más proclive junto con Centroamérica a los desastres naturales. Por eso estoy muy contenta de poder decir estas palabras de la importancia de las mujeres, la importancia de hacer los análisis transformadores de género. No nos alcanza con hacer un mainstream, como dicen, sino que tenemos que hablar del efecto transformador. La crisis generada por la pandemia y los desastres socionaturales de la región nos ha llevado a muchas muertes, a muchas pérdidas, y la suma de todos estos desastres colocó a las mujeres en nuevas situaciones de adversidad, como lo vimos en Haití, en el terremoto, en las tormentas tropicales, en Centroamérica y en todo el Caribe, y también en todas las incendios forestales y las inundaciones que han pasado en el sur de América Latina. En este marco es muy vulnerable nuestra región a los efectos del cambio climático. Por eso celebro que pronto vamos a tener la COP, que esperemos que tenga resultados positivos para que tengamos una esperanza de que el mundo no va a tener mayores problemas de cambio climático, sino al contrario, vamos a revertir esta tendencia. El Banco Mundial nos dice que estas catástrofes socionaturales van a alcanzar a 100.000 millones de dólares. Son cifras increíbles que nuestros gobiernos no están acostumbrados a considerar y que necesitan estar en las cuentas nacionales. Tenemos hasta 17 millones de personas en América Latina que corren el riesgo de ser desplazados por los efectos del cambio climático. Esto es la población de todo un país como Ecuador. Y por supuesto, la mitad de estas personas son mujeres. El impacto de los desastres socionaturales y climáticos exacerban mucho las desigualdades de género que ya existen en nuestra sociedad, en nuestra región, que es la más desigual del planeta. Nosotros pedimos que por favor se tenga en cuenta y se involucre a las mujeres y las niñas durante la respuesta a las crisis y los desastres, para movilizar y asegurar que ninguna mujer, ninguna niña se quede atrás. En este contexto es fundamental asegurar una respuesta que potencie los liderazgos y el empoderamiento de la mujer, que garantice la adecuada coordinación intersectorial tanto al interno como al externo. Es importante no olvidar el rol de los mecanismos de la mujer, de los ministerios de la mujer y también de las organizaciones de base de mujeres de la sociedad civil. Es necesario reconocer y poner el liderazgo de las mujeres al centro de la respuesta. Y también es imprescindible entender que la agenda de las mujeres, paz y seguridad se centra en la prevención de conflictos sociales. Los desafíos humanitarios trascienden las fronteras naturales y alcanzan esos desastres de origen humano como el cambio climático y los incendios forestales. Reconocer que los desastres pueden ser producto de la actividad humana también implica reconocer que podemos trabajar para prevenirlo, no solo en reconstruir el tejido social afectado por una catástrofe, sino también para poner al centro a las mujeres en su respuesta. Considerando que nosotros queremos, de todas maneras, decirles que la elaboración de análisis rápido de género en las emergencias es fundamental para que se centre esa respuesta en las mujeres. Por aquí me quedaría porque sé que hay otras preguntas y quiero cumplir con el tiempo. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ms. Noel Vesa. And I do apologize for the CV descriptor that was read earlier, and we will certainly try to ensure that we have that correct prior to the close of the session, but I accept your graciousness with respect to that. And of course, the contribution that you made in outlining the role of women as we look towards the resilience challenge over the next 10 years is a very significant one for the Americas and the Caribbean. And you've outlined many aspects of the dynamics related to that, including the important role of women and their leadership in that conversation. So thank you very much. So now we turn our attention to a slightly more technical lens on the topic of the resilience challenge over the next 10 decades. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Dave Applegate. And Dr. Applegate is the Associate Director for the Natural Hazards Center in Colorado. And today he is exercising the delegated authority of the Director of the U.S. Geological Survey, an organization that he has been with since 2004. He co-chairs the Interagency Science for Disaster Reduction Working Group and co-leads the Department of the Interior's Strategic Sciences Group. He is also a full-time adjunct professor at the University of Utah's Department of Geology and Geophysics, and has also served with the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources as the American Geophysical Union's Congressional Science Fellow and Professional Staff Member. Dr. Applegate has a BSc in Geology from Yale University and a PhD in Geology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Applegate, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the floor.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this important dialogue. And I want to express appreciation to Jamaica for hosting the regional platform, to the UNDRR, to SEDIMA, and the other organizations that have organized this session. I am pleased to be here on behalf of the U.S. National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, and pleased to be part of such a distinguished panel from whom I am already learning a great deal. Building resilience is a team sport. As climate change and now COVID-19 have shown us, global and regional collaboration, scientific exchange, effective stakeholder engagement, and coordinated actions are critical to addressing complex and cascading hazards. The Biden-Harris administration has prioritized the need to address a set of 4 converging crises, including the COVID pandemic and the climate crisis, as well as advancing racial equity and restoring the economy. Addressing all of these crises is necessary to achieve resilience for the US and the world. Ensuring that collaboration can take place is vital, but it also requires us to create spaces to hear underrepresented voices and ideas. We need to ensure that progress in addressing these crises reaches those who need it the most. Today, I would like to highlight 4 challenges that we are taking steps toward addressing as a global and regional community. The first of those is data sharing. Open and free data exchange across national borders helps bolster scientific advances and gets critical data to those who need it during a crisis. An example of progress is the International Charter for Space and Major Disasters, which greatly expands the array of Earth observation resources available to those responding to disasters. As we look ahead, the Unified Data Policy, just approved by the UN World Meteorological Organization, provides an essential policy framework to improve critical environmental predictions based on a full range of Earth system observations. The second challenge is building partnerships and collaborations between and among nations, which is essential to making progress on disaster risk reduction. Creating effective forums and platforms for international exchanges and collaboration can be quite challenging, and the pandemic has only made that more so. However, these collaborations pay huge dividends when implemented well, offering new insights, discoveries, and partnerships that can make each nation involved more resilient and better prepared for the next disaster. The U.S. Caribbean Resilience Partnership is a great example of collaboration with national meteorological and hydrological services and national disaster management agencies to advance early warning and preparedness capacity for hurricane-related hazards. Responding to concurrent and cascading hazards is the third challenge. Over the past year and a half, we have grappled with response to catastrophic events such as hurricanes, wildfires, and earthquakes, all amid a global pandemic. Emergency response and science agencies have had to quickly rethink evacuation, sheltering, and response using evolving epidemiological understanding and while under intense pressure. Cascading and compounding hazards are also an important and growing challenge. As the frequency and intensity of hazards associated with climate change continue to increase, the consequences of these concurrent and cascading hazards will only increase. As we move forward as a region, we must rapidly learn from these events and apply best practices to prioritize resources, tailor public messaging, and response activities, and collaborate to ensure that we are better prepared in the future. The fourth challenge is incorporating underrepresented communities and voices into resilience-building efforts. Over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic further emphasized what we already knew to be true. Certain underrepresented groups are disproportionately impacted by disasters. This trend is one that we have seen in every disaster. We must work at local, national, regional, and global levels to center those disproportionately impacted by disasters in designing a path toward resilience for everyone, not just the fortunate few. Incorporating underrepresented groups into regional and national planning discussions and policymaking ensures that those most likely to be hardest hit by disasters are able to take the lead in formulating solutions to protect their communities and livelihoods. COVID-19 has shown us that if some of us aren't safe, none of us are truly secure. As we all strive toward the same goal of resilience, the more ideas, the more information, the larger the team, the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for that contribution. And I think you very squarely placed the political posture of the government of the United States and this current administration on the table. Thanks for doing that. And I think the four challenges that you outlined were certainly very clear and I think have resonated well with members of the panel and I dare say members of the audience as well, certainly within the Caribbean context on the points on the cascading and the concurrent hazards. So happy to come back to that when we get into the other questions. Thanks for your contribution. So one of the points that Dave mentioned was the point of open and free data exchange. And our next contributor has worked in this area for many years. Mr. Rolando Ocampo is the director of the Statistics Division of UN ECLAC, and he has held this post since August of 2019. He is an actuary and holds master's degrees in statistics and economics of education and labor from universities in Madrid. He has served on the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, including on its governing board as vice president in charge of the Geographical and Environmental Information Subsystem, and then the Economic Information Subsystem. From August 2013 to December 2017, he chaired the United Nations Regional Committee on Geospatial Information Management for the Americas, or UNGGIM, and was co-chair of the UNGGIM Global from 2016 to 2017. Mr. Rolando Ocampo, I'm happy to welcome you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It is a pleasure to be here. Muchas gracias. Quisiera agradecer a nuestros colegas de UNDRR, del gobierno de Jamaica y a CEDEMA por invitarnos a participar y presentar una disculpa de nuestra secretaria ejecutiva, Alicia Bárcenas, quien por motivos de agenda y complicaciones no pudo estar aquí presente con nosotros. Déjenme comentar sobre la pregunta en particular que nos hacen, empezar con que la mayor cantidad de fallecimientos por COVID-19 ha sido en nuestra región. O sea, equivalen al 32% del total mundial de los fallecimientos. Hay marcadas diferencias entre los países en las tasas de vacunación también. Según cifras a septiembre de la OPS, y que las podemos visualizar a través de el portal del Observatorio COVID de CEPAL en el apartado de vacunados completos, el 75% de la población en América Latina aún no está totalmente vacunada contra el COVID-19 y más de un tercio de los países de esta región aún no han vacunado al 20% de su población. Como consecuencia de la pandemia, esto se ha ampliado las diferencias y voy a tratar en particular de diferencias estructurales en 5 brechas de nuestra región. La primera, el ingreso. La región, la peor contracción económica en más de un siglo en América Latina y el Caribe, en nuestra región, que es una región de ingreso medio, tiene una contracción desde 1900 no teníamos una contracción tan fuerte, una caída del 6.8% y es sin duda el peor desempeño entre las regiones en desarrollo. En el ámbito fiscal, América Latina y el Caribe es una región con el mayor peso de la deuda externa en el PIB, con el 56.3%, y con el mayor servicio de la deuda en términos de exportaciones y de bienes y servicios, que es alrededor del 59%. La brecha digital, 66.2 millones de hogares en nuestra región, América Latina y el Caribe, no cuentan con conexión a Internet. Mayores tasas de abandono escolar, por supuesto, provocadas por la pandemia. La interrupción de la escolaridad presencial ha afectado a 167 millones de estudiantes en todos los niveles educativos. Y la proporción de estudiantes que no alcanzó el nivel mínimo de competencias cognitivas básicas en la región podría aumentar a más del 20%. Ya se ha comentado la cuarta brecha género. Hemos visto durante la pandemia incrementos importantes en la violencia de género contra las mujeres y las niñas y la desigualdad en la distribución de las tareas del cuidado. Lo vemos en los diferentes estudios que en particular en colaboración con ONU Mujeres hemos estado produciendo en la CEPAL, y es muy claro lo que está sucediendo. En términos sociales, la pobreza extrema, 78 millones de personas, 8 millones más que en el 2019, y en pobreza, 209 millones de personas. Al primer trimestre del 2021, la región solo había recuperado un 58% del total de los empleos que se perdieron. En todas las subregiones de América Latina y el Caribe aumentó la inseguridad alimentaria, fenómeno estrechamente ligado a la pobreza extrema. La incidencia en la seguridad alimentaria moderada o grave alcanzó el 40.4% de la población en el 2020. En términos, y no solamente el desastre que provocó la pandemia, pero también tuvimos desastres provocados por fenómenos naturales en presencias en varios países de la región. Fueron afectados por desastres en 2021, los huracanes ETA y Iota en Guatemala, Honduras y El Salvador en noviembre, la erupción del volcán La Sofía en San Vicente y las Granadinas en abril del 2021, las inundaciones, como ya se ha mencionado, en Guyana en junio del 21, y el terremoto de Haití hace apenas unos meses en agosto. Los efectos e impactos de estos desastres se sumaron a los de la pandemia, y estas consecuencias se manifestaron de manera asimétrica en nuestros países. ¿Cuál es el gran desafío? Todo este contexto agudizó las vulnerabilidades económicas, sociales y ambientales en América Latina y el Caribe, una región de ingreso medio con graves brechas estructurales. Fue la región del mundo en desarrollo más golpeada, con crecimiento insuficiente, con crecimiento de desigualdad, con crecimiento de informalidad laboral, con baja productividad, deterioro ambiental, con todos estos efectos que van a perdurar de un tiempo. El gran desafío de la región es retomar el ritmo de crecimiento e incluso mejorar la trayectoria para alcanzar el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, para lograr una sociedad más justa, inclusiva, resiliente y sin dejar a nadie atrás. La pandemia COVID-19 y el cambio climático son fenómenos globales, por lo que las soluciones no pueden ser exclusivamente nacionales, sino apoyarse en la cooperación internacional. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rolando Campo, and really for telling the pandemic story from the lens of statistics and what we have seen as the change in socioeconomic profiles in Latin America and the Caribbean, and for identifying some of those key challenges with respect to how these changes are going to impact on our resilience journey as we go forward in the next decade. So thank you to all panelists for your insightful responses to the opening general question. And now we turn our attention to some more specific areas. And I'll start again with Her Excellency, Elsie Campo Bar, Vice President of Costa Rica. And based on your experience leading a country that takes a multi-sectoral approach to advance the priorities of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Climate Change Agenda, and the Sustainable Development Goals. What actions are needed to accelerate progress in building resilience in a context of increasingly complex and interconnected risks? And how can these actions be inclusive and accessible to all, ensuring that those most vulnerable and disproportionately affected by disasters are not left behind?
Muchísimas gracias. Uno de los temas importantes son, en realidad, estos vínculos que existen entre la agenda de desarrollo y la agenda del cambio climático. Y yo quisiera plantear ahí algunos de los vínculos de la gestión del riesgo y particularmente en la gestión de desastres, no como una agenda en sí misma, sino que relevante por el aporte a los propósitos del desarrollo y a la atención de las problemáticas latentes y manifiestas. Hoy en día, por ejemplo, el urgente posicionamiento que adopta en el imaginario colectivo global el cambio climático como un factor emergente del riesgo que amenaza el incremento de eventos de desastre y suma la incertidumbre respecto a la condición futura del planeta y las oportunidades para el desarrollo social. Las políticas de gestión de riesgo deben de tener, por supuesto, ya lo ha planteado María Noel Baeza, una perspectiva de género, considerando a las mujeres en todas las áreas y realmente poniéndolas en el centro de la atención, la prevención y la resiliencia en los desastres socionaturales. El resultado que se espera de una política de gestión de riesgo con enfoque integral es la reducción de pérdidas ocasionadas por desastres, contribuyendo a mejorar las capacidades humanas para el aprovechamiento de oportunidades y el logro de propósitos comunes de bienestar. Una tarea clave en la gestión del riesgo orientada a favorecer el cumplimiento de tales propósitos es la generación de información para reducir la incertidumbre respecto a las condiciones futuras, relevante para la toma de decisiones y el ordenamiento territorial, para la inversión pública, para el desarrollo de la infraestructura, para la producción, aportando para la planificación, en la planificación de medidas de prevención que reduzcan los riesgos, el control de factores de riesgos existentes para mitigar el impacto y la preparación para emergencias ante los hechos que se consuman. Generación de información pertinente. El otro tema, en postulados similares a los que se orientan las propuestas de acción para la adaptación del cambio climático en la dimensión específica del riesgo sobre el cual opera, pero que tiende a converger en proyectos similares con un énfasis particular. La gestión del riesgo de la adaptación del cambio climático tienen agentes comunes que demandan articulación para aprovechar los recursos y las capacidades que, por ejemplo, aporta el Sistema Nacional de Gestión de Riesgo en el caso costarricense. Ambos temas deben de ser abordados de manera inherente en todo el ámbito de la política pública, como un concepto de prevención en los instrumentos de planificación del desarrollo en todos los ámbitos sectoriales y territoriales. Con respecto a la inclusión social, es necesario dar solidez a los programas sociales en beneficio fundamentalmente de la población más pobre, con necesidades diferenciadas. Tal es el caso de personas con discapacidad, niñez, adultos mayores, migrantes y mujeres que han sido claramente identificadas en estos procesos. La pandemia, al igual que otros eventos de desastre, ponen en manifiesto la necesidad de hacer más eficiente el uso de los recursos limitados, pero con una mayor eficacia en las intervenciones por medio de la integración de diversos programas y metas comunes. El enfoque no debe de ser atencionista. Eso quiere decir, no debe estar centrado simplemente en la lógica de los damnificados o víctimas del desastre. Debe ser aplicable tanto en las situaciones de emergencia y también en la perspectiva y gestión del riesgo. Los programas de intervención social deben de incluir el propósito de reducir la vulnerabilidad de las personas. Por ejemplo, reasentando comunidades que están en sitios de peligro y fomentando el desarrollo de sistemas de alerta y organización para la evacuación efectiva cuando ésta se necesita en el caso de eventos que puedan generar desastres. Finalmente, quisiera plantear un elemento clave para los siguientes años y es la generación de datos desagregados que faciliten la medición del avance a efecto de reducir y rendir mejores cuentas sobre la atención real de la vulnerabilidad, generar mejores decisiones, tener una mayor identificación de la cantidad y ubicación de las personas que son afectadas por los efectos del desastre, pero fundamentalmente para generar las planificaciones futuras que permitan disminuir el impacto en las personas y en el ambiente. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and we really appreciated your sharing those experiences with respect to the role of public policy in your country and how that has supported your resilience building efforts. And I think very importantly coming through as well was the treatment of the social dimension of resilience and the efforts that have been made towards inclusion. So we really appreciate that contribution, the insights from the approach that has been taken in your country. Thank you so much. So I want to direct the next question to our representative from UN-ECLAC, Mr. Ocampo. And with the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic and its differentiated impact on vulnerable groups, and also considering the exacerbated trends of disaster impacts from other natural or geological or human-induced hazards witnessed in Latin America and the Caribbean, what do you consider to be the key public policy actions to achieve transformative recovery with equity in the context of current and potential emerging complex systemic risks?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me move to Spanish. Desde CEPAL, nosotros consideramos que para afrontar este desafío, el que nos estás comentando, las principales acciones de política pública para lograr una recuperación transformadora, nosotros proponemos establecer un criterio alternativo e innovador para asignar los flujos de ayuda oficial al desarrollo, renovar la cooperación internacional, incluyendo a los países de ingreso medio, que somos casi todos los de la región de América Latina y el Caribe, y usar el marco analítico de desarrollo en transición. Para nosotros esto es muy, muy importante. Es importante identificar que las acciones, o sea, el ingreso per cápita es una medida insuficiente para evaluar los avances en el desarrollo, el bienestar y la sostenibilidad de los países. No se puede equiparar solamente con el PIB per cápita, el nivel de desarrollo de un país. Necesitamos renovar todos estos modelos, renovar la cooperación internacional con base en una clasificación que vaya más allá del PIB per cápita, que desarrolle y que refleje el nivel de desarrollo de los países y en particular lo que nos compete dentro de CEPAL, nuestros países que son de ingreso medio. La Agenda 2030 y los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible son guías e indicadores para evaluar los avances hacia el desarrollo sostenible y definir nuevas formas de cooperación y de alianzas estratégicas. Ya se comentó en esta reunión las alianzas público-privadas, cómo participa el sector público y el sector privado en estos nuevos esfuerzos para poder generar esta nueva resiliencia. Y uno de los ejercicios que se está planteando y que se está trabajando es el de desarrollo en transición, que es un marco analítico con mediciones que incluye toda esta parte de las trampas al ingreso medio, las brechas estructurales que permiten reorientar la cooperación entre los diferentes ámbitos, los privados, los financieros, los gobiernos, los organismos internacionales. Ya hay un diálogo muy estrecho con la Unión Europea y con la OCDE para empezar a trabajar y desarrollar y potenciar este marco de desarrollo en transición. Y la idea es utilizar este marco analítico para definir los criterios de otorgamiento del financiamiento internacional del desarrollo. Es decir, el concepto de desarrollo en transición que nosotros entendemos desde CEPAL visibiliza trampas y vulnerabilidades estructurales. Tiene trampas medioambientales, en la cual pues hay una dependencia a un patrón intensivo en carbono en nuestra región, hay un agotamiento de recursos naturales y tenemos una estructura productiva de baja tecnología. Hay una trampa por consecuencia de productividad en los cuales nuestras exportaciones son de muy baja sofisticación y tenemos poca integración con las cadenas de valor. Y las pequeñas empresas, las MIPYMES, tienen muy baja productividad. También hay una trampa institucional porque hay una gran fragmentación de los servicios públicos que son insuficientes en las capacidades, en la baja moral tributaria. Nuestra región también tenemos una evasión fiscal muy alta, de las más altas de la región, y tenemos escasos recursos públicos. Estamos generalmente con muy pocos recursos y generalmente, y como lo comenté en la primera participación, con tasas de endeudamiento muy altas. Y por supuesto hay trampas de la vulnerabilidad social en la cual hay estratos que son vulnerables, que ahora tuvieron shocks más fuertes, hay una informalidad laboral, hay ingresos y ahorros volátiles, hay poca formación y muy baja productividad de nuestra estructura laboral. Entonces, todas estas tendencias, como lo mencioné, son globales y están incorporando los elementos como el cambio climático, el incremento en desastres provocados por fenómenos naturales, los cambios demográficos, la transformación digital, en la cual si no atendemos de una forma conjunta todas estas trampas, las trampas, la medioambiental, la de productividad, la institucional y la de vulnerabilidad, va a ser muy complejo que podamos salir adelante. Entonces, lo que nosotros estamos yendo es hacia el modelo de desarrollo en transición y es la propuesta de la CEPAL en conjunto para aportar estos elementos. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ocampo, and your significant years of working with UN ECLAC has certainly been reflected in the insights that you shared in defining what you call the new resilience. And I think that your contribution will resonate incredibly well, certainly with the territories of the Caribbean, which pose many of those face many of those challenges which you outlined related to being upper middle income states. And I very much appreciated the point you raised with respect to the fact that the per capita income is not sufficient really for providing the guideposts with respect to decision making on the international support, and your point also on international cooperation, the fact that we have to address this issue together. I think that has resonated incredibly well. Thank you very much. So I want to pose my next question to Ms. Maria Noel Vesa. And Ms. Vesa assumed functions as the Regional Director for the Americas and the Caribbean in July 2019. And she previously worked as the Director of the Program Division at UN Women Headquarters in New York. Ms. Vesa joined UN Women from a very diverse experience within the UN system, having worked both at UN Ops as well as UNDP. And she's a national of Uruguay, and she holds a doctorate in law and social science from the University of the Republic of Uruguay and a master's degree in international public policy from Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. So my question to you, considering that the social and economic crisis provoked by the COVID-19 pandemic and other disasters that occurred simultaneously to the pandemic have aggravated pre-existing gender equality gaps, impacting girls and women in a differentiated fashion, what concrete recommendations would you give in order to reduce these gaps in the context of climate change, environment, and disaster risk reduction policies and programs?
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch to Spanish, if you don't mind. Para nosotros es fundamental abordar las brechas de género en la elaboración e implementación de políticas públicas sobre el cambio climático, sobre la reducción de desastres, sobre el medio ambiente. Nosotros consideramos que necesitamos hablar de gender transformation, no solamente gender responsive o gender sensitive. Tenemos que hablar de efectos transformadores. Nosotros creemos que la evaluación oportuna de los impactos diferenciados de las emergencias y desastres en mujeres, hombres, niñas y niños es muy importante. Y es muy importante orientar la respuesta de corto plazo, así como los esfuerzos de recuperación de mediano y largo plazo, considerando los efectos en las mujeres y en los hombres. Es muy importante también los análisis rápidos de género en las emergencias del COVID y las emergencias de los distintos desastres naturales. Eso lo hemos demostrado, lo hemos realizado y eso permite a los gobiernos y los donantes tener una idea de qué está pasando con las mujeres. Hemos hecho lo mismo en los huracanes Iota y Eta en Centroamérica y en el terremoto de Haití, donde es obvio que si no se pone al centro a la mujer, es muy difícil que entonces las mujeres puedan tener y volver a tener esa autonomía cuando se las considere en los efectos de recuperación. Y desde nuestra oficina en el Caribe hemos realizado estudios sobre la desigualdad de género y el costo de la inacción ante el cambio climático en Antigua y Barbuda, Belice, Guyana, San Vicente y Surinam. Es muy importante hablar del costo de la inacción y del costo de no poner a la mujer al centro. Nuestra recomendación es crear y promover espacios de coordinación que aborden las dimensiones de género en la gestión de desastres, la consolidación de herramientas que tengan enfoque de género y derechos, y de enfoque de género y de derechos humanos. Y también es importante tener mesas de diálogo, como tenemos en la red LAC, en la red regional de riesgos, emergencias y desastres para América Latina y el Caribe. Nosotros tenemos una mesa específica de género para abordar la perspectiva de género en la planificación y en la rendición de cuentas. Y esto se ha traducido en una mayor incorporación de la perspectiva de género y de derechos de las mujeres, en más acciones de empoderamiento y en un mejor conocimiento y uso del marcador de género, que para nosotros es una medida transparente de determinar cómo se está gastando en las mujeres. Y también es importante, no nos olvidemos nunca de que las acciones de violencia contra la mujer siempre se exacerban a la hora de una pandemia. Nosotros hablamos de la pandemia en la sombra, que es la violencia de género durante la pandemia porque se exacerbó la violencia contra la mujer. También es importante continuar fortaleciendo las capacidades de los actores nacionales que están involucrados en la prevención y gestión de riesgos de desastres. Esto es fundamental, que siempre consideren esa perspectiva de género. Y también identificar dentro de los riesgos cuáles son los que más importan a las mujeres. En definitiva, la dimensión de género es fundamental para que si en el momento de llegar las subvenciones, que sean dirigidas a las mujeres. Porque siempre pasa lo mismo, ¿no? Las mujeres no están consideradas, entonces no se les da las subvenciones. Sobre todo tenemos que considerar los sectores de turismo y agricultura, donde las mujeres están trabajando y son quizás la mayoría. También es importante la gestión en los refugios, que se comparta con los mecanismos nacionales de género, que se compartan las guías y los manuales y siempre pensando en que la violencia y los actos de agresión sexual ocurren en esos refugios. Por eso es importante la protección de la mujer. Y por último, para nosotros es fundamental también considerar la interseccionalidad de la mujer, porque las mujeres somos diversas. Somos afrodescendientes, indígenas, discapacitadas, mujeres de distintas orientaciones sexuales y de distintas edades. Por eso es importante siempre tomar estos elementos a la hora de la respuesta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maria Noel Reza, and your contributions, the terminology of the requirement for gender transformation, I think is a very strong message coming out of this opening panel. And thank you very much for breaking that down in terms of what you see the gender transformation to look like and those key actions that need to be taken. So we'll circle back to our delegate from Brazil, from Campinas, Brazil. And Mr. Dario Sadi, I want to ask you, based on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 scenario, what opportunities can cities have in terms of their planning processes and strengthening urban resilience? And how do you foresee the relevance of partnerships and articulation between national and local governments to build disaster risk reduction for urban resilience in the next decade? Over to you.
Eu vou responder em português. Campinas tem feito um trabalho de integração não só com os governos estadual e federal, no sentido de articular ações que possam diminuir o risco de desastres naturais, como também estruturar a sua defesa civil e os demais órgãos que atuam no enfrentamento à diminuição de risco e também nas catástrofes naturais. Além disso, a pandemia do Covid-19 nos mostrou que essa integração ela deve ser não somente com os governos estadual e federal, mas também no âmbito da administração municipal. Nosso Comitê de Enfrentamento à Covid-19 contou com a participação de vários órgãos do município e do estado, principalmente a Defesa Civil, que teve uma participação muito importante. Eu acredito na articulação de ações, não só dentro dos órgãos que estão dentro do município, mas como Campinas é centro de uma região metropolitana que tem mais de 3 milhões de habitantes, essa articulação também foi regional. e trabalho também numa frente nacional de prefeitos das cidades com mais de 80 mil habitantes no Brasil, onde fizemos também uma articulação nacional do ponto de vista das cidades, para que as cidades pudessem enfrentar não só a pandemia da Covid-19, mas discutir um planejamento urbano que garanta a sustentabilidade, a preservação do meio ambiente e, principalmente, a inclusão social. Se nós não tivermos um foco muito estabelecido no desenvolvimento sustentável, as futuras gerações vão pagar um preço muito grande. Campinas tem essa visão de trabalhar em conjunto, articulado, não só com as instâncias do município, do governo do estado, do governo federal, mas também do ponto de vista regional e nacional. Esse é o caminho que eu acredito ser o melhor para que nós possamos ter, como eu disse, um desenvolvimento que respeite o meio ambiente, que possa diminuir os riscos de catástrofes naturais e desastres e também, além de diminuir o risco, quando, infelizmente, tivermos que enfrentar, nós possamos ter uma estrutura pública, seja municipal, estadual e federal, que consiga dar respostas nos grandes desastres naturais. Eu tenho uma participação na Frente Nacional dos Prefeitos, como eu disse, sou vice-presidente da área de saúde da Frente Nacional dos Prefeitos do Brasil e acredito que a articulação em todos os setores, o trabalho conjunto de todos os segmentos é o caminho. E vejo aí, no município, que disciplina o uso e ocupação do solo dos municípios aqui no Brasil, um papel fundamental para garantir a redução dos riscos de desastres naturais, bem como uma preservação do meio ambiente e, sem dúvida, preservar a nossa nação para as futuras gerações. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadi. And I think from your intervention, we understand why Campinas has really been showcased as an excellent example of how we need to go forward in building resilience. So thank you so much for this. And our final question on this round is to Dr. Dave Applegate. And Dr. Applegate, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 emphasizes the importance of a scientific basis for risk-informed development. What lessons do we learn from COVID-19 in terms of a more effective use of science and technology for policies and practice in supporting disaster risk reduction in the context of more complex, interconnected risks?
Well, thank you for that question. Two of the important lessons for the effective use of science and technology brought home by the COVID-19 pandemic are first, the importance of integrating social and behavioral science expertise in order to effectively support disaster response. And second, we must understand and quantify disaster losses to inform mitigation and response to current crises and future disasters. To the first point, the COVID-19 pandemic is a complex disaster during which the science has been constantly evolving. When the experts in the biomedical sciences work hand in hand with the experts in the social and behavioral sciences, we can more effectively reduce risk at multiple levels and achieve the best outcomes. Incredible advances in epidemiology, virology, vaccinology, and other areas have come out of the pandemic. This disaster has also showed that the social and behavioral sciences are equally critical. Communicating and messaging protective actions, best practices, and scientific advancements must keep pace with evolving scientific discovery. Messages delivered at the outset of such disasters must be crafted strategically in order to help all stakeholders prepare for shifting guidance and collectively receive up-to-date information. one challenging aspect of this pandemic has been understanding when and how to communicate to diverse audiences about protective actions. And the same is true for every hazard. And the social sciences are the key to understanding how to ensure that community members take full advantage of the best hazard-related science to protect their lives, livelihoods, and property. To my second lesson on the importance of tracking losses, as COVID-19 rapidly spread across the world, medical researchers understood the urgent need to track the losses it left in its wake. This real-time analysis of disaster impacts allowed decision makers to make crucial choices about reopening schools, public health messaging, provision of care, and prioritization for vaccination. In short, COVID-19 vividly emphasized the importance of quantifying disaster losses and having a data-driven approach to managing crises. As we strive towards creating a more resilient future for our region, measuring the magnitude of disaster losses will play a critical role, whether data are being analyzed in real time or there are decades between disaster events. This information helps us understand what is at stake in the face of many different hazards and allows us to understand what mitigation actions have been effective. The Sendai indicators give us a roadmap to improving disaster loss reporting, allowing nations to learn from other nations as we all work towards a similar goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Applegate. And that contribution really connects with certainly our colleagues here in the Caribbean, particularly about the points you've raised about the social and the behavioral side of the events. And this has played out not only in the pandemic, but also with respect to a diverse set of other hazards that we face in the region. And thanks so much for putting that on the table. And certainly the evidence base for decision making is one of the messages that we send as well through our comprehensive disaster management strategy. So thanks so much. I want to thank really all of the panelists for the very comprehensive and insightful responses to those questions that were posed. And now we have the opportunity to hear from two other contributors, Ms. Miriam Urusa, who is the Secretary of Integral Risk Management and Civil Protection of Mexico City. Ms. Urusa is an architect with 40 years professional experience, and she is, of course, also a consultant for UNEP and UN-ECLAC's Latin America and the Caribbean offices and coordinated projects in Mexico, El Salvador, Haiti, Guatemala, and Colombia. She's also an active member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the National Civil Protection System on Social Sciences in Mexico, and she has completed postgraduate studies in research and teaching of urbanism and at the University of Chile. She obtained a postgraduate diploma in political and social sciences in Germany as well. And it's our pleasure to welcome her to the meeting and to invite her to make her contribution. Over to you. Okay, so perhaps we can go to Ambassador Slater as we work through the technical side of this. So I'm going to invite Dr. Douglas Slater, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Human and Social Development for the Caribbean Community, to come in on the discussion at this time. Ambassador Slater assumed the position of Assistant Secretary General of the Directorate of Human and Social Development of the Caribbean Community Secretariat on October the 1st of 2013. A national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and a medical doctor by profession, Ambassador Slater previously held ministerial portfolios of foreign affairs and foreign trade and consumer affairs, as well as being the Minister of Health and the Environment in his home country. Dr. Slater has also been a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and we're happy to invite him to make his contribution. Ambassador Slater.
Thank you very much, Ms. Riley, I hope you're hearing me, just to confirm that.
We are hearing you well. Please
Great.
continue.
These are some of the challenges of the virtual world. However, let me start by sincerely expressing our gratitude to the organizers of this meeting, and I do so on behalf of Ambassador Carla Barnett, our Secretary General. We are indeed pleased to participate in this very meaningful activity, and we wish to thank the government of Jamaica, one of our own CARICOM member states, for being the host of this event. Wish to thank you, Madam Chair, as the head of our Regional Disaster Management Agency, SEDEMA, and also the representatives of UNDRR. I acknowledge the presence of Vice President and Mayor and Honorable Ministers and all of the delegates. A lot has been said, and I will try to be as concise as possible. I'd like us to address the various disasters, though, as natural. We have natural disasters such as the earthquakes, the volcanoes, some storms, but we also have a category of anthropogenic disasters or man-made, which are topical now, climate change. And they also impact on some of those natural disasters by intensification of some of the natural ones. We also have social and economic disasters, and we are doing this in the environment of the global pandemic, COVID, which is a health disaster, and a lot has been said about it. So we are here addressing resilience when we have COP going on and when we have COVID going on. Indeed, some significant challenges. I heard from all presenters, and a very common trend was the importance of inclusivity, and especially inclusion of vulnerable stakeholders. A lot has been said about the inclusion of girls and women. And yes, I think that is very important, because the leadership of girls and women is very important in addressing these challenges. We are proud to say that we are in the region have demonstrated our confidence in that by having our own, the chair of this event is the head of our disaster management agency. And we are proud to be able to demonstrate that way. Also, we have many national emergency management agencies among our member states headed by women. And just to be a little humoristic, we know that for the doctors involved here, and most know that women are naturally more resilient than us males. The life expectancy of women are, by general, a good 3-4 years or more than us men. So they have demonstrated naturally their ability to put into practice resilience, and so they earn our trust. I would like to focus on a few issues. I think in order to address all of these resilience issues, we need to recognize what are needed, what is needed, what are the issues that need to be focused on. Resources, human and financial resources. Human resources, in terms of I just addressed some of it, inclusion of our women. We need to address social inclusion and to target the most vulnerable. Financial, we need to have policies geared at addressing the issues of solidarity that is needed. So I know it is accepted that in order to address these, you need financial resources. But we have heard in these discussions of the inequitable situation of the global finance and available availability of resources among especially Latin America and the Caribbean. Most of us are middle-income countries, developing states, and we know that there are challenges there. We know that some of us as middle-income countries have been quote-unquote graduated away from access to concessionary financing. And I want to place on record our gratitude to the ECLAC or CEPAL for their support in us making a strong case for our vulnerabilities being more of an item to utilize as a metric in determination of our access to resources rather than our GDP. I note the issues related to communication and social science, and that is one of the areas that solidarity among member states can help by the transfer of technology, the sharing of data that we have heard of. And we saw just recently the disaster caused by COVID, how important these aspects are. We want to convey our gratitude to those member states of Latin America and Caribbean, and also to the United States for all the assistance offered. Dr. Appowit raised some issues that are very important. And the importance of sharing of technology, of scientific information, of social communication. We saw some immense challenges. Well, we are seeing vaccine hesitancy. How do we address that? And all of us will need to work together to come to a solution. We have seen some of our member states, particularly in the Caribbean, have really not just have to deal with the general challenges of climate change, which all of us are susceptible to, and now COVID, but specifically, let us say, one of our poorest countries, Haiti. We had issues there of seismic activity, earthquakes. Added to that, social and political challenges, and then come COVID. And so too in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the impact of the disaster of the volcano compounding already existing climate change and the COVID disaster. So all in all, I think this was a great opportunity for us to see the need for, one, working in solidarity, two, recognizing the importance of developing public policies and resilient systems to all disasters. And I think if we would address the issues and discussions raised here at the regional, at the local, to have involve all the stakeholders at local and national levels, and to also have regional, interregional, and international solidarity, we will do well in addressing. So thank you again for having us participate in this very important event, and we anticipate your continued collaboration, and together we can do better and make all of the lives of our peoples a better, a higher quality life to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Slater. And that perspective from the CARICOM Secretariat is sincerely valued. And the critical role that the CARICOM Secretariat has played, certainly in this region, in promoting and supporting the political directorate in that posture of regional solidarity has been very significant in directing the quality of the region's response, certainly to COVID-19. And we do know that resilience is also one of the priority areas under the strategic direction of CARICOM as well. So thank you very much for your observations and contributions. We will try now to return to Miss Miriam Urusa, and I hope now we have overcome the technical difficulty, and I invite you to make your contribution. Over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Liz, y perdón a todos por este pequeño problema que se suscitó. Quiero darles un muy buenos días todavía a todos y a todas, un cordial saludo desde la Ciudad de México. Sin duda, han sido una suma de intervenciones muy enriquecedoras que nos permiten no solamente identificar los elementos que nos diferencian, sino sobre todo identificar los muchos más temas que compartimos. Agradezco verdaderamente la consideración para que en este panel de alto nivel se incluya nuestra intervención como gobierno local, como es la Ciudad de México. Hoy comenzamos, yo creo, una plataforma regional singular, pues todas y todos hemos estado al frente de decidir cómo proteger a las personas, protegernos a nosotros y al mismo tiempo, aún entre mucha incertidumbre, hemos tenido el reto de adoptar soluciones de manera rápida para avanzar en la recuperación sin olvidar los compromisos por avanzar en el marco de acción de Sendai. Si bien hemos tenido que mirar por lo que ocurre dentro de nuestras comunidades y demarcaciones territoriales, la interdependencia que hay entre nuestros sistemas debe ser un gran catalizador para contar con colaboraciones que permitan intercambiar soluciones, habilidades, capacidades y recursos de una manera eficaz y eficiente. Verdaderamente, el día de hoy hay muchas propuestas que se han planteado, no solamente de cooperación internacional, de financiamiento, del papel de los diferentes actores, la cooperación científica, la generación de políticas públicas de gestión integral de riesgo, que esto, por supuesto, debe convertirse en una propuesta de acción regional finalmente. Hoy, más que nunca, el compartir experiencias exitosas en la recuperación post-COVID como parte de la estrategia en la generación de políticas públicas locales juega un rol clave para reducir el riesgo de desastres a través del fortalecimiento de la resiliencia socioterritorial a nivel global, destacando su papel, por supuesto, en el contexto latinoamericano. Los impactos económicos y humanitarios causados por los desastres de origen natural, la crisis climática y la reciente pandemia del COVID-19 han hecho que el flujo de fondos en marco la cooperación internacional por concepto de ayuda al desarrollo se reconfiguren de tal modo que permitan incrementar la capacidad de respuesta y acelerar una recuperación sostenida en los países en vías de desarrollo. Esta semana es clave. Nosotros conversamos cómo avanzar de manera conjunta y a la par. Debemos mirar el avance de las discusiones que comenzaron con la COP. Incansablemente debemos continuar dando propuestas y haciendo el llamado para que las medidas sean para toda la sociedad. Sin embargo, debemos reconocer que nuestro mayor reto es la coordinación, apoyar la generación de diálogos y consensos entre los distintos sectores para invertir en la implementación de medidas que permitan velar por la protección de las personas y de los servicios ecosistémicos que no podemos afectar más o incluso perder. Con las intervenciones que hemos tenido de Elsie, Rolando, Carla, Darío, David y María Noel, no queda duda que vamos avanzando en girar de una visión reactiva a ir construyendo resiliencia. Hemos ido poco a poco superando barreras que permiten escuchar la experiencia y bases técnicas para evitar repetir errores. Sin embargo, queda mucho por hacer y no podemos esperar que pase más tiempo por el bien de todas y de todos. Por ello, me sumo al llamado de superar los desafíos que permitan construir resiliencia entre los distintos niveles de gobierno y sectores. Debemos ser más enfáticos, apoyar redes solidarias con visión a futuro y no solo para la emergencia. Debemos evitar poner a prueba cuánto podemos resistir y más bien considerar el abanico de oportunidades, personas, bienes y servicios por proteger. Esto solo será posible gracias a la apertura por la innovación, a compromisos sólidos y a una planeación prospectiva que reconozca nuestras debilidades y plantee la necesidad de tener una mayor coordinación y ambición por mejorar nuestros sistemas de protección social o salud, como ahora por la pandemia del COVID-19. Espero verdaderamente que en el futuro no lejano podamos reunirnos físicamente y celebrar lo que hemos hecho posible. Por mi parte, cuenten con un aliado para continuar apoyando los esfuerzos locales y la construcción de resiliencia en la región. Sigamos abriendo paso a la innovación, al trabajo de base y a todos aquellos marcos que brinden soluciones duraderas para que la prevención sea la fuerza de la región. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Arusa, for your contribution. And we're really happy you were able to come in to share those experiences. So, colleagues, unfortunately, we are very much out of time. I'm really happy we were able to squeeze in the contributions from all persons. We won't be able to do the final statements as we had originally planned to, but I just want to say maybe just 2 or 3 things in terms of sort of key messages that came out from you. One is that in discussing resilience, we're discussing a complex issue, and there is a need for us to work together. And I think that came out very clearly from the presentations. We also talked about the need for new models in terms of approaching resilience. The social dynamics were there, the evidence base and the role of the scientists was there, and importantly, the economic considerations were very much brought to the table with some interesting suggestions from UN-ECLAC on how we could go forward in that regard. And the third point I want to speak to is resourcing resilience. And I think this was an important point that was raised, especially within the context of the climate change and the fact that from a policy perspective, we need to be inclusive, we need to capture social dimensions within public policy conversations, as well as inclusion of gender transformation. So thank you to all members of the panel. Let me just acknowledge you as I close. Her Excellency Epsi Campbell-Barr, Vice President and Foreign Minister of Costa Rica. We have Mr. Dario Jorge Giolo Sadi, the Mayor of Campinas, Brazil. Thank you so much. Ms. Maria Noel Veza, Regional Director of UN Women for Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Dave Applegate, the Associate Director of Natural Hazards here on behalf of the U.S. Geological Survey, and of course, Mr. Rolando Ocampo, Director of the Statistics Division of UN-ECLAC. Colleagues, it's been great moderating the session. Thank you so much for your invaluable contributions. We want to thank also our colleagues from the CARICOM Secretariat, Ambassador Douglas Slater, and also Ms. Miriam Irusa for giving their contributions as well. I hope you continue to enjoy the regional platform 21. Thank you again to our coordinators for the session, the government of Jamaica. We want to thank also our colleagues at UN-ECLAC, PAHO, SAPREDNAC, and of course, the team at the SEDIMA Coordinating Unit. It's been great being here. Thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of RP21.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I thought Elizabeth Riley, Executive Secretary of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, did a fantastic job as moderator, and we certainly take the opportunity to thank our speakers, our panelists, for giving up their time and, of course, their effort and their information. Certainly, some points that resonated with me is the fact that the vulnerabilities, the challenges and disasters that were discussed in that panel discussion is common to all of us. Really, it does not matter where we live or what country we represent. We're a part of a small region, and as such, we have the same issues and we are affected in the same way. The points that resonated with me also is that climate change is interlinked directly with the existing political, social, and economic factors that already are amongst us. The access to information, data exchange, scientific exchange is...
It was very easy to moderate this.
No problem. It's okay. Whenever we're dealing with digital, this always happens. They spoke about the importance of access to information, data exchange, as well as scientific exchange. So we get these insights, but what do we do with them? Is it just big data, or do we turn it into smart data? The communication has to be clear and effective across all boards for all stakeholders. This is a team sport. It's a proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you got to take other people with you. So collaboration and partnership, global, regional, as well as locally, is absolutely key. We have to identify the vulnerable communities and implement plans, assess needs, invest in intervention measures, and look at the long-term, the medium to long-term sustainability plans. And if we're going to do allocation of resources, we need to consider human as well as financial. When we look at recovery, response, this all requires a rethinking, reimagining, adaptable and agile preparation that is data-driven. And finally, when we look at the recovery and response, it requires diverse leadership, meaning vulnerable persons, underrepresented groups, underrepresented voices need to also be at the table. I also want to thank our panelists for speaking about the importance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in order to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. I really did appreciate all of the knowledge that was exchanged in that panel discussion. So we crave your participation. For those of you who are watching via social media platforms, please go ahead, participate, put your questions in the chat. And for those of you who are using the Hopin platform, don't forget to always click on your session tab, which is located on the left-hand side, and you can participate in polls and different questions and answers that are available at the top. So we will see you back here at 2. Please visit the Swiss Corporation virtual booth with special surprise events that is on the Hopin platform. See you at 2.